Friends, we all know the cliche, all that glitters is not gold. But especially in the world of art, who is to help us to separate the gold from all the tinsel rubbish that we get all the time? The art critic, of course. A political activist and social reformer, Kalki saw art as a power of dharma and a power of karma. Since art had such a tremendous impact on every aspect of the individual's life and on every aspect of public life, he saw art criticism as an indispensable necessity. Convinced that the art critic shouldered a crucial responsibility not only to art, but to society, Kalki wrote reviews of music, dance, theater, cinema, and various other forms of art, literature, under the pen name Karnataka. Today, when serious art criticism, at least in India, has been ousted from all major publications and mostly exists in the form of laundry lists and puff pieces, it is difficult to grasp the power that Kalki enjoyed as an opinion maker and as an opinion changer with his reviews and critiques. In this context, it gives me great joy to invite Anita Ratnam to share her thoughts on the role of criticism as she sees it today. She's a dancer, and we know that she's been rigorously trained in the Margam, and she has created her own genre of dancing as well. Anita is best described as a culture intersectionist in her work on the stage as well as her work on the page. She brings together many different disciplines, dance, theater, ritual, performance, in her work, in her performance as well as in her writing. She also brings something which is quite rare, the knowledge and the confidence of someone who's had exposure and direct interaction with many forms of art across the world. We all know that Anita critiques art with an inborn grit and has promoted critical writing in her magazine, Nartaki, with a very rare open-mindedness about experimental work and avant-garde work. And with all this background, I think Anita will have some very interesting, even intriguing insights to share about art criticism. So I invite you, Anita, with great pleasure to speak to us today and share your thoughts.
Thank you, Gauri, Rukmini, Shankar, and Akhila. Namaskaram to all of you. I'm delighted to speak at this month's Zoom soiree of the Kalki Biography Project. I'm truly honored to share my thoughts about the altered landscape of arts criticism and cultural discourse. From my arangetram at age 9, I have spent over 55 years on the stage and on other public forums. I share today some glimpses, moments, and assorted thoughts from being an arts producer, presenter, writer, and performer. The year 1999, the month January, a cold winter day in New Delhi. 40 dancers, eminent, celebrated, and admired, gathered in the hall of the India Habitat Center, all dressed in black. In silence, each dancer holding a flower approached the center of an empty space on which only a single vase was placed containing a long-stemmed flower. The song playing in the background was Krishnani Begane Baro. Quietly, with solemn faces, the dancers, one by one, placed the flower inside and around the vase, made a small dance movement or gesture, and exited. Another dancer appeared. The event was attended by the A-listers of the capital city, organized by the late culture critic Shanta Sarabjit Singh. It was curated to protest the closure of the arts column in the Hindustan Times and to herald the unfortunate mashup of dance, music, and arts with the word entertainment. Arts and entertainment became the hyphenated heading for all things cultural as we entered the 21st century. Allegedly, the National Daily crumbled under the continuous pressure of angry dancers, their parents, spouses, or fond relatives who phoned, wrote, and threatened the critic after a not so flattering review. Or perhaps the publishers found the increasing interest and financial gains from other areas like food, fashion, film, and cricket. Either way, the arts column folded. A week before that event, I was in Bombay, now Mumbai, for a stage show at the NCPA. It was still a time of writing letters to friends and sending postcards with save the date, hoping that my circle of friends would attend. I happened to drop in to meet a journalist friend at the Times of India office, who told me bluntly, quote, "Forget all these previews and reviews. All you need is one photo caption on the front page of the city edition," end quote. She led me out of the office, which was opposite the bustling Victoria Terminus train station. And we got our shot. And yes, that was enough. The show was sold out within 2 hours after the paper hit the stands. There was no critic present and no review appeared. And I was congratulated on a very, quote, productive visit to Maximum City. That was 22 years ago. Today, we cannot imagine a pen as fiercely independent as Shanta Sarabjit Singh or her colleague Subudu, who wrote in the Indian Express. They exercised their opinions freely, and Subudu in particular was colorful and sometimes extremely personal in his remarks about dancers he adored and those he did not care for. But the editors gave them space and a free hand, knowing that a healthy discourse only builds a culture of curiosity and a generation of critical inquiry. As Matthew Arnold wrote in his famous series, Essays in Criticism, quote, "The function of a critique and a critic is to awaken the spirit of informed intelligence that can play upon not just literature or art, but also theology, history, science, and sociology. In fact, every sphere to see the object as it really is." I think back to a time and the era of the 1960s onward in India, when dance and music performers were beginning to multiply, when arts pages were avidly awaited in each city when they appeared on Fridays or weekends, when words of praise were carefully cut out and pinned or framed, or negative reviews ripped and torn or folded into paper boats and sunk in bathtubs. To get a sentence of praise from a respected critic was precious. The image of a classical dancer began appearing on Tourism India posters, and the stardust around dancers began to accumulate. Every national daily had a dance critic, or at least an arts writer as a permanent staffer. Many were not trained writers, but their passion for attending and reviewing performances was endless. As they trained their eyes and mind to watch dance, music, theater, painting, and other arts, the artists were also honing their skills. My years of living in New York City made me realize the power of the arts critic. A positive review meant a Broadway show survived. If not, the show closed within a week. There was an incident of Britain's mega star Diana Rigg and her colleagues, who waited until 3 a.m. for the New York Times review of their ambitious play, Medea. They hung around a 7-Eleven convenience store until the paper was delivered. They opened it with silent prayers, hoping that Clive Barnes, the guru of all theater writing, had approved. A loud whoop of joy was heard on West 53rd Street. Medea, the $3 million production, had survived. For the New York Times, dance critic John Martin was especially important. When he was appointed in 1927, it was the very first time that a national daily had hired a special writer to cover dance. In those days, dance writing was only about ballet, and then the review concentrated on the orchestra rather than the dance performance. But Martin was about to change all that. Fascinated by the immediacy of American contemporary dance and its resistance to conventional beauty, he used his platform to, quote, educate and illuminate the American public about this rising new form of dance expression. Using modern dancer Martha Graham as his subject, Martin was developing his own vocabulary about modern dance, and he saw Graham as representative of his theories of modern dance in action. There were some rules that all media critics in the US adopted. They would not socialize one-on-one with artists. They would not visit an artist's home if invited. They would not jeopardize their professional objectivity with personal friendship. These rules were followed meticulously and with great care. When Alistair Macaulay, the dance critic of the New York Times, visited India about 6 or 7 years ago, he just walked up to me in the lobby of the Music Academy and said, hello, turned and walked away, muttering, I can't say more or stay longer. This clinical distancing between artistic subject and the writer is not the reality in India. Too few critics, perhaps, in comparison to the large number of performers, and the lack of an independent critical spirit stains our souls. By and large, we are unable to separate our art and the artistic output from ourselves. Anything written that's not high praise is constituted to be a personal slur. There occurred a famous incident in Bombay between a dancer and a critic in the late 70s. After a negative review, the critic was beaten at a public event with a dancer who removed her slippers. The relentless narcissism of the artists, the refusal to separate artistic product from person, the inability to put down that mirror and look around the world, and the rise of social media. These are some of the death blows to arts criticism in India today. As space shrinks or disappears, no young writer is being encouraged to learn or train in arts writing. The words that appear few and far between in some papers have become liners for dustbins. Today, even after 50 years in the public space and 40 of those years on television and digital media, I still have to carefully navigate a tightrope walk to tell a young dancer that her appearance was careless, her energy was flagging. Too much political correctness and too much wokeness has dented the independent voice of the arts writer. Today, we read about a danseuse, not a dancer, as if a French accent somehow brings about respect. We read about liquid eyes, feet like a gazelle, fingers that made magical shapes. Her dance was as breezy as a cappuccino. And just last week, there was a review about a Kathak dancer that said, quote, I wonder how far she can spin without becoming dizzy or losing her balance, end quote. This is exactly what is called the body parts syndrome. How not to write about dance as taught by New York dance critic Elizabeth Zimmer. What is then the role and responsibility of a critic who's both watching, consuming, observing, and then commenting about the live and visual arts? Writing is both an art and a science. The critic must draw the viewer like a needle through a thread, carefully quilting and recreating the moments of the creative output, but also sparking an interest in the artist and the form. Good arts writing must be arresting, interesting, authoritative, professional, personal, and appropriate. Writing a review is also an exercise in minimalism. After extensive research and copious note-taking, one has to remove all the extraneous and superfluous content. Like Spanish painter Picasso, who created his now famous minimal line drawing of the bull at the end of the Second World War, or sculptor Rodin, who said, I choose a brick of marble and chip away at what I don't need. I've spent 50 years on stage and I've had my fair share of good and bad reviews. I've also been writing about culture and performances for the past 21 years on my own portal, which focuses on dance and movement arts. I've tried to bring my many worlds of English literature, theater, dance, television, and women's studies into my arts writing. But I've also been at the receiving end of much anger, trolling, and hissing matches whenever I do not heap praise or what I think, constructively comment on some dancers' faults or lack. Once in 2008, two celebrated dance critics, Leela Venkatraman and Shanta Gokhale, both did not praise my what I thought was a wonderful performance, Neelam. I did not rant, rave, or blame. Instead, I picked up the phone and spoke to both women, asking them what they found disappointing about the performance. I listened carefully, took notes because they had watched very carefully, and their comments were very valuable. I went back to the work, made the adjustments that I thought were appropriate, and realized that I had become too close to the work. Theatre director Peter Brook compares the act of public speaking or writing to a performance. And that is how we must view a critic's words, as we must the writings of Kalki. He was a consummate example of an artist as a performer and an activist. He was director, scenographer, choreographer, scriptwriter, and all his stories. And for him, the arts were an integral part of the national fabric. His essays were insightful, informed, witty, forthright. I mean, he has forgiven Arekudi Ramanuja Iyengar for a brilliant concert, even when his voice was not perfect, and he's taken Semmangudi to task. He was one of the many admirers of Bala Saraswati and dragged many anti-Sadir supporters and converted them into fans of her dance. He admired Rukmini Devi for her aesthetic and flayed the Music Academy for ignoring Tamil compositions. I wish my maternal grandfather had met this unput-downable spirit. Soon after his release from Singapore Changi prison, after being incarcerated for 2 years during the Second World War, tortured repeatedly in the most inhuman ways by the Japanese, he returned a changed man, remote and distant. He took to painting, an act of solitude, until his passing. If he had read Kalki's irrepressible take on his own incarceration under the British, perhaps, just perhaps, the dark clouds may have lifted a little. What would Kalki do if he were with us today? He certainly would not need a brand manager or a PR agent. How would he have looked at social media? And even if he was not present on it, his fans and admirers would have created the @Kalki Krishnamurthy official account across all platforms. His writings and quotes would be tweeted, shared, and retweeted. The power of his words, his wit and humor would guarantee fan clubs on Facebook and Clubhouse, on podcasts, on Zoom, and as a star speaker at Lit Fests. His presence, even if he felt amused by the fuss of it all, would be inescapable. And if he did choose a presence on social media, all his handles would have the blue verified tick. 67 years after his passing, the Tyaga Bhumi, India he fought for, seems to be at crossroads. The national fabric looks frayed and worn. As India enters her 75th year of independence, I wonder what Kalki Ramaswamy Krishnamurthy of 100 avatars would have said as he looked at the state of the nation that he willingly went to jail for, and the failure of the media barons to encourage and support space for the arts and cultural discourse. However, his unfailing optimism and inward poise would not falter, cutting through the shrill cacophony and information overload to write, speak, observe, comment, urge, cheer, while enthusiastically riding on the roller coaster called life. Thank you.